This element of uncertainty lent an interest to the occasion, which it could not otherwise have attained. Thus, the masses were entertained and pleased, and the thinking part of the community could bring no charge of unfairness against this plan, for did not the accused person have the whole matter in his own hands? This semi-barbaric king had a daughter, as blooming as his most florid fancies, and with a soul as fervent and imperious as his own. As is usual in such cases, she was the apple of his eye, and was loved by him above all humanity. Among his courtiers was a young man of that fineness of blood and lowness of station common to the conventional heroes of romance who love royal maidens. This royal maiden was well satisfied with her lover, for he was handsome and brave to a degree unsurpassed in all this kingdom, and she loved him with an ardor that had enough of barbarism in it to make it exceedingly warm and strong. This love affair moved on happily for many months, until one day the king happened to discover its existence. He did not hesitate nor waver in regard to his duty in the premises. The youth was immediately cast into prison, and a day was appointed for his trial in the king's arena. This, of course, was an especially important occasion, as His Majesty, as well as all the people, were greatly interested in the workings and the development of this trial. Never before had such a case occurred, never before had a subject dared to love the daughter of the king. In after years, such things became commonplace enough, but then they were in no slight degree novel and startling. The tiger cages of the kingdom were searched for the most savage and relentless beasts, from which the fiercest monster might be selected for the arena. And the ranks of maiden youth and beauty throughout the land were carefully surveyed by competent judges in order that the young man might have a fitting bride in case fate did not determine for him a different destiny. Of course, everybody knew that the deed with which the accused was charged had been done. He had loved the princess, and neither he, she, nor anyone else thought of denying the fact. But the king would not think of allowing any fact of this kind to interfere with the workings of the tribunal, in which he took such great delight and satisfaction. No matter how the affair turned out, the youth would be disposed of, and the king would take an aesthetic pleasure in watching the course of events, which would determine whether or not the young man had done wrong in allowing himself to love the princess. The appointed day arrived. From far and near the people gathered, and thronged the great galleries of the arena, and crowds, unable to gain admittance, massed themselves against its outside walls. The king and his court were in their places opposite the twin doors, those fateful portals so terrible in their similarity. All was ready. The signal was given. A door beneath the royal party opened, and the lover of the princess walked into the arena. Tall, beautiful, fair, his appearance was greeted with a low hum of admiration and anxiety. Half the audience had not known so grand a youth had lived among them. No wonder the princess loved him. What a terrible thing for him to be here. As the youth advanced into the arena, he turned, as the custom was, to bow to the king, but he did not think at all of that royal personage. His eyes were fixed upon the princess, who sat to the right of her father. Had it not been for the barbarism in her nature, it is probable that the lady would not have been there, but her intense and fervid soul would not allow her to be absent on an occasion in which she was so terribly interested. From the moment that the decree had gone forth that her lover should decide his fate in the king's arena, she had thought of nothing night or day but this great event and the various subjects connected with it. Possessed of more power, influence, and force of character than anyone who had ever before been interested in such a case, she had done what no other person had done. She had possessed herself of the secret of the doors. She knew in which of the two rooms that lay behind those doors stood the cage of the tiger, with its open front, and in which waited the lady. Through these thick doors, heavily curtained with skins on the inside, it was impossible that any noise or suggestion should come from within to the person who should approach to raise the latch on one of them. But gold and the power of a woman's will had brought the secret to the princess. And not only did she know in which room stood the lady ready to emerge, all blushing and radiant, should her door be opened, but she knew who the lady was. It was one of the fairest and loveliest of the damsels of the court, who had been selected as the reward of the accused youth, should he be proved innocent of the crime of aspiring to one so far above him. And the princess hated her. Often had she seen, or imagined that she had seen, this fair creature throwing glances of admiration upon the person of her lover. And sometimes she thought these glances were perceived and even returned. Now and then she had seen them walking together. It was but for a moment or two, but much can be said in that brief space. It may have been on most important topics, but how could she know that? That girl was lovely, but she had dared to raise her eyes to the loved one of the princess. And with all the intensity of the savage blood transmitted to her through long lines of holy barbaric ancestors, she hated the woman who blushed and trembled behind that silent door, hidden to all other lookers-on, even to the king. The only hope for the youth in which there was any element of certainty was based upon the success of the princess in discovering this mystery. And the moment he looked upon her, he saw she had succeeded, as his soul he knew she would succeed. Then it was that his quick and anxious glance asked the question, which? It was as plain to her as if he shouted it from where he stood. There was not an instant to be lost. The question was asked in a flash. It must be answered in another. Her right arm lay on the cushioned parapet before her. She raised her hand and made a slight, quick movement toward the right. No one but her lover saw her. Every eye but his was fixed on the man in the arena. He turned, and with a firm and rapid step, he walked across the empty space. Every heart stopped beating, every breath was held, every eye was fixed immovably upon that man. Without the slightest hesitation, he went to the door on the right and opened it. Now, the point of the story is this. Did the tiger come out of the door, or did the lady? The more we reflect upon this question, the harder it is to answer. It involves a study of the human heart, which leads us through the devious mazes of passion out of which it is difficult to find our way. Think of it, fair reader, not as if the decision of the question depended upon yourself, but upon that hot-blooded, semi-barbaric princess, her soul at a white heat beneath the combined fires of despair and jealousy. She had lost him, but who should have him? How often in her waking hours and in her dreams had she started in wild horror and covered her face with her hands as she thought of her lover opening the door, on the other side of which waited the cruel fangs of the tiger. But how much oftener had she seen him at the other door? How in her grievous reveries had she gnashed her teeth and torn her hair when she saw this start of rapturous delight as he opened the door of the lady? How her soul had burned in agony when she had seen him rush to meet that woman, with her flushing cheek and sparkling eye of triumph. When she had seen him lead her forth, his whole frame kindled with the joy of recovered life. When she had heard the glad shouts from the multitude and the wild ringing of the happy bells. When she had seen the priest, with his joyous followers, advance to the couple and make them man and wife before her very eyes. And when she had seen them walk away together upon their path of flowers, followed by the tremendous shouts of the hilarious multitude, in which her one despairing shriek was lost and drowned. Would it not be better for him to die at once, and go to wait for her in the blessed regions of semi-barbaric futurity? And yet that awful tiger, those shrieks and that blood. Her decision had been indicated in an instant, but it had been made days after days and nights of anguished deliberation. She had known she would be asked. She had decided what she would answer, and without the slightest hesitation, she had moved her hand to the right. The question of her decision is not one to be lightly considered, and it is not for me to presume to set myself up as the one person able to answer it. And so I leave it with all of you. Which came out of the open door, the tiger or the lady? Thank you.
I love the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with that caution, with what foresight, with this mutilation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during that whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of the door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I made an opening sufficient for my head, I put a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out, and then thrust my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay about his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture's eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moved quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think, there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he had not even dreamed of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved in his bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you think I drew back. But no, his room was black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew he couldn't see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern with my thumb. It slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprung in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I didn't move a muscle. In the meantime, I didn't hear him lie down. He was sitting up in bed, listening, just as I had done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan. I knew it was a groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain, it was not a groan of grief. Oh no, it was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He was trying to fancy them causeless, but he could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing. It's the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with his suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death had stalked him with black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my hand within the room. When I waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You can't imagine how stealthy until the length of a single simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious. As I gazed upon it, I saw it with perfect distinction, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it, and that chilled me the very marrow to my bones. But I could see nothing of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there comes to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew the sound well, too well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of the drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think I'm mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the arms, and the head, and the legs. Then I took up 3 planks from the floor of the chamber and deposited them all between the stanchions. I then replaced the boards so cleverly and so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could detect anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too weary for that. A tub had cut it off. Ha, ha. When I made it at the end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock. Still dark at midnight. The bell sounded the hour. There came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with light heart. For what had I now had to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor. During the night, suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been logged to the police, and they, the officers, had been deputied to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I had to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent from the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed him his treasures, secure, undisturbed. It was the enthusiasm of my confidence. I brought chairs into the room and desired them to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in wild audacity and perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpus of the victim. The officers were satisfied. The manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They say, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But they sat still and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained in defiantness until, At length I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I grew very pale. But I talked more fluently with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much a sound a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly and more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would it not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, and was excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose all over and continuously increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard it not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this desertion. I couldn't bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark, louder, 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 villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit to thee, tear up the flames. Here, here is the beating of his hideous heart. Thank you.
Leacock was originally born actually in England. As a very young boy, he traveled to Canada with his family. And in the early 20th century, he was perhaps one of the English-speaking world's most well-known humorists. Today we honor Stephen Leacock with an award, the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor. It's a very prestigious honor given to encourage Canadian humor writing, and is awarded to the best in Canadian humor writing. The foundation was instituted in 1946, and the first Leacock Medal was awarded the next year. The presentation occurs each June at the Stephen Leacock Award Dinner at the Geneva Park Conference Center in Orillia, Ontario, where he lived most of his life. Stephen Leacock was an economist, and perhaps the choice of my financial career reflects perhaps his feelings about the banking industry in a humorous way. So let me begin. When I go into a bank, I get nervous. The clerks make me nervous. Those little windows on the counters, they make me nervous. The sight of money makes me nervous. Everything in a bank makes me nervous. The very moment I go through the door of a bank and attempt to do business there, I become an irresponsible fool. I knew this before I went in, but my salary had been raised to $56 a month, and I felt the bank was the only place for money like that. So I walked in with dragging feet and looked shy. I had an idea that a person about to open an account was obliged to consult the manager of the bank. I went up to the counter marked accountant. The accountant was a tall, cool fellow. The very sight of him made me nervous. My voice was deep and hollow. "And I see the manager," I said, and added solemnly, "alone." I don't know why I said alone. "Certainly," said the accountant, and fetched him. I held the $56 clutched to the screwed up ball in my pocket. The manager was a grave, calm man. "Are you the manager?" I said. God knows I didn't doubt it. "Yes," he said. Can I see you? I asked. Alone? I don't know why I said alone again, but without it, this thing seemed obvious. The manager looked at me with some alarm. He felt that I had a terrible secret to reveal. Come in here, he said, and led the way to a private room. Turn the key in the lock. We are safe from interruption here, he said. Sit down. We both sat down and looked at each other. I found no voice to speak. One of Pinkerton's men, I suppose, he said. He had gathered from my mysterious manner that I was a detective. I knew what he was thinking, and it made me worse. Oh, no, not from Pinkerton's, I said, seeming to suggest that I came from a rival agency. To tell the truth, I went on, as if I had been tempted to lie about it, I'm not a detective at all. I have come to open an account. I intend to keep all my money in this bank. The manager looked relieved, but still very serious. He concluded now that I was a son of Baron Rothschild. A large account, I suppose, he said. Fairly large, I whispered. I propose to deposit $56 now and $50 a month regularly. The manager got up and opened the door. He called me out. Mr. Montgomery, he said in a kindly loud voice, this gentleman is opening an account. He will deposit $56. Good morning. I rose. A big iron door stood open outside the room. Good morning, I said, and stepped into the safe. Come out of the safe, the manager coldly, and showed me the other way. I went up to the accountant's counter and pushed a ball of money at him with a sudden quick movement as if I was doing a conjuring trick. My face was pale as death. Here, I said, deposit it. The tone of words seemed to be, let's do this painful thing while we're in the mood for it. Took the money and gave it to another clerk. He made me write the sum on a piece of paper and sign my name in a book. I no longer knew what I was doing. The bank was going round and round in front of my eyes. Is it deposited? I asked in a hollow, vibrating voice. It is, said the accountant. Then I want to draw a check. My idea was to draw out $6 for present use. Someone gave me a checkbook through the little window, and someone else began telling me how to write it all out. People in the bank had the impression that I was an eccentric millionaire who had something wrong with him. I wrote something on the check and thrust it at the clerk. What? Are you drawing it all out again? He asked in surprise. Then I realized that I had written 56 instead of 6 on the check. But I was still too far to reason now. I thought it was impossible to explain the thing. All the clerks stopped writing to look at me. Reckless with misery, I made up my mind. Yes, the whole thing, I said. You withdraw your money from the bank, every cent of it. Are you not going to deposit any more? Said the clerk, astonished. Never! A foolish hope struck me that they might think that something had insulted me when I was writing the check. and that I had to change my mind. I made a wretched attempt to look like a man with a fearfully quick temper. The clerk prepared to pay the money. "How will you have it?" he said. "What? How will you have it?" "Oh," I caught his meaning, and I answered without even trying to think. "In 50s, I said. He gave me a single $50 bill. "And the sixes?" he asked loudly. "In sixes, I said. He gave it to me, and I rushed out. As the big door swung behind me, I caught the echo of a roar of laughter that went up to the ceiling of the bank. Since then, I bank no more. I keep my cash in my trousers and my savings in silver dollars in a sock. Thank you very much.